Right. Well, if you record it, one of the things I will do is hold up a book which was very influential for me, and you know, it's a bit of an advertisement, if you like. What it is, it's a book. I'll tell you before you start. It was lent to me. But do you remember Stansworth, Walter Stansworth, the person?
No.
Oh, it might have been before you were there. He was the personnel guy at Walsall, and I was always having to go at bureaucrats, you know, and that sort of thing. And he says, oh, look, I'll lend you a book will be very useful to you, you know, about bureaucracy. And he did it. Although I noticed that it wasn't his book. It was a council book. It belonged to the council. So it was a Personnel and Management Services Unit of the Chief Exec's Department. And he spent the next 20 years trying to get it back off me. And I refused to let him have it.
Well, can we see this book, Dave, now you've mentioned it?
Yeah. Can you read it? Can you see
I
it?
can, yeah. Elliot Jake, A General Theory of Bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I imagine it's probably out of print now. It's probably such a bestseller.
Bestseller, yeah. It must have been. Yeah, it must have been. God knows how many times I had to have a reprint, you know. But it's a wonder everybody ain't got one, actually. Very useful, very useful for me at times. Anyway, so the first thing I suppose I ought to say is I'm going to start off, and it is talking about, or seems to be talking about me and the internal Labour Party when I joined and that sort of thing. But it's not really about that. But I think it'll go some way to demonstrate that it wasn't that when we started talking about decentralisation and neighbourhood offices before that, it wasn't as if we'd got that and we were just going into to implement it. We started off really just for the couple of years talking about the problems and what they were and why it is that things, in our view, weren't working as they should. So it'll give some idea about that if I do mention my own background and where I come from. And the first thing to say is that I don't come from a political background at all. My family, none of my family, mum, dad, mum and dad were probably apathetic Labour voters, but that's about it really. So now that's not unusual, but it demonstrates that when you're saying you're starting talking about just an ordinary member of the public trying to get themselves involved, it's true. It can happen that way if you go down a certain track. Now, my track was getting involved at a youth club, Marsley Youth Club. Now I won't go into all the details except to say that I was a real bloody rebel. Did everything that I could to upset the youth leaders at that club, and I got away with quite a bit of it. And then it resulted in them deciding that what we ought to have is a members committee, and I don't know whether they expected me to or not, but I got involved. I got elected to the members committee. Even then, getting elected to the youth club's management committee. The management committee was a body that was appointed by the local education committee, including a few councillors who were on it. And here was Dave Church, this bloody 15-year-old rebel, starts getting involved with them. These leaders, they even tried to despite what they said, the two of them were active political Labour Party members, and one thing they did is convinced us as young people that we ought to listen to the MP, and he was invited to speak to us. And now that really did cause some problems, because I did a bit of research, found out he'd converted to be a Catholic, and he was although he was Labour, he was dead against the idea that was hot at the time, and that was free contraception on the National Health Service. So when he came and turned up to the meeting, you can imagine the subject that we raised. or all 13, 14 and 15-year-olds, and it was a bit embarrassing for them. It was really good. After
Who was
that,
the MP, Dave?
Wells, Major Wells. As time went on, and I'll tell you, I got to the stage where I was allowed to call him William Wells rather than Major Wells. But that was a long time on. But these two leaders then asked me and suggested that I join the Labour Party. Now, when they suggested that to me, I was amazed, because although I said we would come from a working class area, that the Labour Party comprised of these posh councillors and all that, and I didn't know they wanted people like me as a member. But I signed up. Well, I didn't sign up. I went to the first meeting. Well, there was that few of us that I ended up being chosen as the chair of the Young Socialists, which is the first meeting I attended. I was put on the constituency management committee as a rep. And the first meeting I attended, I'd been lobbied, and I voted to expel somebody who'd been in the Labour Party for years, and he was a local alderman. It was only then that they realised I'd gone through that, but I hadn't actually joined yet. So it was a bit funny. But that was how I sort of started to get involved with the old political system, if you like. It went on long before I was roped in as the branch secretary, but by a bloke. They wanted me that much. They agreed for the Labour Party to pay for the telephone in my dad's house where they lived, because we hadn't got a phone. We weren't that privileged, if you like. So then I went on to become constituency party secretary. Then in 1972, I was elected as the councillor for Bloxbridge West. Now, the thing I wanted to raise there to show what it was like at the time, I was selected as the candidate in what in effect was the second best Labour seat out of 20, the second best in the town. And I was selected by 4 people. There was only 4 members of Bloxbridge West Labour Party who turned up to pick the candidate for what was in effect the second best seat for Labour in the town. I was selected as the candidate, and then I went on a year or so. I was actually appointed group secretary, and at a very early age, and I was part at that stage. I was part of the controlling establishment of the Labour group, not out of line with the establishment, if you like. But the views I tended to express at that meeting, the group meetings, were on the left, and that led to a certain position. Now, the next thing that I need to raise, because some of the ideas that we had and wanted to do, that could only be really implemented because Walsall, well, first of all, the Labour Party, its structure is obviously based on electoral structures, branches and constituencies, and later on the wider county basis. And because Walsall had gone through so many changes, 1966, Darlaston and Willenhall joined Walsall, Aldridge merged with Brownhills, Feasey and Streatley. 1972, Aldridge Brownhills joined Walsall, Clayhanger went to Cannock. The reorganisation of the constituencies, the boundaries all took part, and later on we even bumped into the Stonehouse fiasco, where the local MP who had then replaced Wells as the Walsall North MP decided he was going to fake his death and run away to Australia. Now all that lot led to breakdown of the local Labour Party. Its structures was thing, but it fortunately it opened up to change, the kind of change that we were very much looking for. There came a time after the first round of when we were in control of the Labour Party was in control of Walsall Council, we lost, and the Conservatives took over. And it was at that stage that obviously there was the move, which there always is, to have in effect a change of the leadership, a generational change. Get rid of the old, bring in the new. And this leg was led by John Brady and Brian Powell, who I'll probably talk about later on. But John, it was intended that John would be the leader, and they were lobbying for that group leadership. The numbers were such that concluded that somehow they'd got to capture me from this establishment position within the group, because they needed the votes. They needed a vote or whatever. And this was really was a few days that changed things for me. They found out I was visiting the Treasurer's Department that day about some matter, and they decided to hijack me halfway up the stairs to the Treasurer's Department to try and talk me into voting for John Brady as the leader. And well, the first thing is they were amazed when I totally agreed. I listened to John in the Labour group and what he was saying, and I definitely supported John Brady. But they were surprised that I said it quite openly and definitely without any great argument. But then what happened then really was change for me, because for the next hour and a half, we were halfway up the stairs to the Treasurer's Department on a bit of a landing, and we spent 1.5 hours talking about what it was about, that it was not just about getting rid of one leader and having another. There was a lot more wrong, not only within the Labour Party, but in the very structure of the council and how it operates. So it really was a sort of a beginning. The usual thing, what I've just said, that we talked about how stupid it was about the fact that just 4 people had picked me as the in effect as a Labour Party candidate. We went through was how the problem with the Labour Party, because of the structure based on and it got to be on an electoral system. It inevitably built its own pyramid. The ordinary Labour Party members attended a branch, but that chose 3 delegates to go somewhere, or 2 delegates to go somewhere else. So from then, most of the members, very few of them, but most of them, the Labour Party members didn't meet in Walsall. They sent delegates to different organisations, if you like. They never met each other. They had to work through other people. Now, strangely enough, that's something that, because the numbers, is overcome with the local Labour Party now, because they are starting to have meetings instead of having constituency management committees and bother Labour parties. They do meet as a collective Labour Party members. It's a good thing, but we didn't have that. So what we decided that we would do, we would actually form something that would bring people together in one body. The second thing that really we recognised was a real problem in the Labour Party is the split. Now, I'm not talking about left and right now. I'm talking about that there was a tendency for there to be the industrial workers, the trade union members, industrial workers, and particularly in engineering, or industrial workers who work for the council, funny enough, in the housing department and the rest of it. And then on the other hand, the intellectual people who come from an intellectual point of view, the teachers, the solicitors, architects, and people like that. And we realised that there were enough of these to become the majority, to become a socialist majority. So Now, I don't think that was accident. I mean, Brian Pell was from St Matthew's Ward, which was, generally speaking, as I said, the teachers, lecturers, and the rest. And John Brady came from Willenhall South Ward, which is very much the industrial trade union workers. And so we realised we'd got to find some way of bringing them together. Now, then there was the council itself. Although we were socialists, we believed in the public sector. We wanted to see a public sector growing. In fact, we wanted, as I said, a collective system, a socialist system. But we had to realise, and we did realise at that meeting halfway up the stairs, that that's how people didn't feel that way towards. They didn't see Walsall Council as something which they owned and controlled. Oh yeah, they went, well, a small percentage of them went out and voted once a year for the council, but it was not really theirs. And we concluded that we've got to do something to break that down, look at why that was, and do something about it. Now, the pleasing thing about that 1.5 hour thing, as I said, is that we were agreeing with one another. It wasn't just about we can go to the next Labour group and remove the leader and put John Brady there. We realised there was a lot more to it than that. And so that was it. We realised that somehow that we'd got to find a way where people saw that they were part of this thing called sort of Walsall Council, and it was theirs. As I said, the pleasing thing was that John Brady and Brian and myself was this wider thing. It wasn't just a matter of change the leadership. We've got to change that a lot more. It's then that we three of us decided to form a Tribune group that would bring any Labour Party member in Walsall to meet. We haven't got any agenda as such, but to meet and do what we'd done in them that 1.5 hours. Looked at the problems. Look at what our problem in a way was. Let's say our problem in the sense that we were socialists, collectivists, wanting to promote the public sector and which included Walsall Council. So the Tribune group, the decision, it later became the socialist group, but it was really the same thing. In fact, we went on, myself and John Brady, to visit Bristol, where they had formed a Tribune group. Now, let me be honest and say that, yes, the main thing about forming a Tribune group was that it could be a lobby group within the party. And because it was, in effect, a group that supported Tribune members of Parliament, it would be hard to argue against us holding such a lobby meeting, and that was what it was for. That was what Tribune was for. Unfortunately, the very first meeting that we held, there was the big challenge to the idea of a group. Funny enough, there was no problem for saying that we should get rid of the present leader and replace him with John Brady. That was agreed, but not the Tribune group. There was a big division there that led to real problems. Firstly, the opponents of forming the Tribune group, they didn't just cease to attend meetings and say that they didn't want to come. They became active opponents of the formation of this Tribune group. I can understand why, because they saw it as the possibility, which ended up that way, as a split within the Labour Party. They didn't see that our objective wasn't that. It wasn't just to have this sort of split and replace one leader with another. It was attempting to recognise that the biggest problem that we had got was that the Labour Party was already split on a bureaucratic way. You know, all 20 branches, and then 3 constituencies and 1 by the Labour Party, and most of the members of the Labour Party never met one another, even in a single town like this. And so in a way we weren't splitting things, we were actually attempting to bring that together. So we continued to have the meeting and continued to push for John Brady as leader until he died. He was quite ill and died, and we transferred then to picking Brian Powell as the leader. But it didn't stop the fact that our party was still a Tribune group that was acting formally and informally, considering what was going wrong and what we needed to do about it. Now, after a long time in a number of the meetings, said formal and informal, we came to sort of conclusions. Now, the first thing to say is we're not talking about now about resolutions of the Tribune group as such, and we're certainly not talking about these are going to be specific proposals that we're going to find a way of including in the local manifesto. It was not that way, but the main points, you know, we're saying, by the way, some of them do relate again to the Labour Party and the internal workings of the Labour Party. But it wasn't that we've seen that was the number one priority. It demonstrated the problems in the Labour Party, demonstrated the wider problems in democracy. So within the Walsall Labour Party, we continue to bring together, as we said, the idea of all the members who consider themselves to be socialists anyway, together, particularly this idea of bringing together across the board, you know, the lecturers, teachers, solicitors, bricklayers, industry workers working in industry, to bring that together, to break down that division. And I think because of Brian and because of Brian and John Brady's attitude, although John wasn't there then, we to some extent succeeded in that. But that's the internal Labour Party matters. But of course, in many ways, that reflected a bigger gap, one which to this day I think is the one that we've got to break down. And that is the one that is a gap between people who are called people and people who are called politicians. You know, when we think about it, we've got this sort of position. You take a place like Walsall. Now, my guess is if you interpret who is a politician, well, obviously a member of a party, and I know I'm talking about whether it's Labour, Tory, Liberal, BNP, any party that you want to. If you call them, if you talk about, well, at least they attend a couple of meetings in a year, and at least they do something in an election. Now, if you call that the definition of a politician, I'm telling you, if in Walsall there's 0.5% of the people who can be termed politicians, you know, 99.5% do not consider themselves to do that. Now that's numbers. Now, I'm not suggesting that somehow we find a way of, I wish we could, of getting 100% people involved in a political party at all. Not talking about that. But when it's such a small group as that, when it's such a small percentage of the population, how can you get anything other than democracy just being a once a year thing where somebody goes out and puts an X on a piece of paper? And by the way, they usually do that to get rid of somebody, not to actually put somebody else there. You can't. Democracy, I think, can't work when it's at that kind of level. There's a requirement for information to be passed down as well as the people, so that the people can grasp that information and make the appropriate decision. Now, can I give you an up-to-date example of this. You see, we concluded at the time that although we talk about working class people and middle class people and the rest of it, in reality, there was another group, and it was called the political class. We were part of the political class. We were part of a group with Tories and Liberals, and anyway, we were all the same, but we'd been rejected by the people. Now, let's take this to a recent example that I had, and I'm talking about a few months ago. Well, a bit more than that perhaps, but not too long ago. Walked into a pub, and I was stopped by two members of the public, two chaps. Now my guess is they were probably about sort of 30 years old, something like that. And they spent a lot of time berating me about the fact that the council had just increased the council tax by 5%, the maximum that could in effect be allowed in a way without a referendum. And they spent some time explaining to me how this was disgraceful, why had we done it, and all the rest of it. Now I listened to him for the little bit, and the first thing I did, I pointed out, well, look, you know that, I'm coming from a socialist, a Labour background. Yeah, we know that. I said, we know that. I said, well, look, that 5% has just been put on by a Tory council, not us, not even Labour. No, I'm not in Labour now. And their reaction is, oh, well, yeah, they're all the same. It don't really matter. I took the next step and said, well, look, can I tell you something? I've not been on the council now for more than 22 years. I've not been on the council for 22 years. So why do you raise this with me? Why didn't you raise it with another member of the customers in this pub? And they got the same answer. Oh, I know that. I know you ain't been on the council, but you're all the same. You're all politicians. You all know what's happening. Now, when it reaches that stage, how can we have a proper debate and discussion which will allow the people to make decisions based on policies and what they think are the best and what they think is the worst that we should implement? When you have a position where people like that have totally rejected us all, with all the same, don't know what party you're in. Now that is the big gap that we've got to find a way of breaking down, and it's that, funny enough, that led to what I'm coming to in a bit, the decentralisation. Third thing, the Thatcher sell-off was going on at this time. The sell-off of BT, gas, electric, water, British Rail, all of that lot was being sold off. No opposition, or very, very limited opposition to the members of the public. I mean, I remember my dad, I talked about him not being political, but he was Labour, if you like, but not when he come. If he got enough money to buy a few shares in British Telecoms, he knew he would sell them within a few weeks, and it would pay for the holiday next year or something like that. There's no question, there's no thinking that we were saying. I mean, even Matt Millen, the Tory, referred to the selfishness, the foolishness of Thatcher selling off what he termed the family silver. But there was no opposition. I even used a way of demonstrating this at a Labour Party meeting when I referred to not just the sell-off of BT, gas, electric, water, this round. Said and Thomas Cook, the travel agent, sold off. And although it was a Labour Party meeting, hardly any people in that room knew that we owned Thomas Cook, the travel agent. So here you've got a position where it was publicly owned by the people, and they didn't even know that they owned it, never mind opposed selling it. So that demonstrated a real problem. But there's another one that problem that we worked on and talked about, and that can relate to Thatcher again, funny enough. She did us a bit of a favour, perhaps, by outlining, bringing up some of the problems. Related to a Times newspaper on the run up to the 1979 election. They interviewed a woman in the street, and apparently she was a single parent with a couple of 2 kids, and she talked about the fact that she'd had to recently go to the housing department to report a thing about damp to the property. She'd had to go to what she termed the Social Security Benefits Office because there was a problem there. She'd been to the book appointment to the doctors and had a problem with the receptionist there. She had to go to the education department of the council about school enrolment for one of the kids who was had learning difficulties. She'd done that. Now the reporter from the Times asked her, well, who are you going to vote for? He was obviously expecting to say, oh, I'm Labour. And she said, oh no. She said, I'm voting Tory. And when the surprise reporter saying, well, yeah, why that? And said, it's Mrs. Thatcher. She's dead right. Look, I've been to the housing department, the benefits of the doctor's section, the education department, school enrolment. I've been to see about. Look, these people who I've been to see, Margaret Thatcher's right. I've got to get these people off my back. So here we got a position where there's someone, I suppose, taking it to the extreme, who, without the public services, without the public sector, well, to be blunt, she'd be dead in the street, virtually dead in the street, and goodness knows what would happen to her children. But she actually saw the civil servants as a burden. They were on her back. And what's more, when you think about it, that's understandable, because she saw them as her boss. I mean, when you look at the book that influenced me about bureaucracy, if you read that and say, well, what's a boss? What's the definition of somebody who's your boss? Well, your boss is somebody who tells you what you've got to do, tells you the time you've got to do it, tells the place that you've got to go and do it, and they tell you how much money you're going to get for doing it. Now, that was that civil servant, wasn't it? She wasn't. That civil servant was her new boss. Can you imagine if it wasn't? Perhaps can you imagine if she didn't regard that person as if she thought she was on an equal terms? When I don't know, somebody today, Universal Credit, they get a letter saying turn up at this time and all the rest of it. If they found it and said, well, I'm sorry, I can't make it that date, but I can make it next Wednesday at 5:30. You know, I'll do it then. I mean, that's nonsense. The power rests with the civil servant. Now, it's impossible to see how you can get rid of that in the reality. But what you've got to find a way in it is that within the mind of that civil servant, or whatever you want to call it, that there's got to be a proper relationship, because the person they're talking to has got to see them as not the boss, but as their servant who's trying to help them. Now, I don't think you can do that at a very high level. You need a lot more servants, a lot more public sector workers operating at a level where they're bumping into the real people, not through a bureaucracy, not working for the council, and the council has got elected representatives, and then there's the chief executive, and then there's a head of department, and then an assistant head of department, and not that, but a direct, not with everyone. You've got to have somebody who is in the office running the show, if you like. They're not going to meet daily members of the public, but we need enough people who are meeting the people they work for on a daily basis, and you can only do that if you do it at a much smaller level than some massive metropolitan borough council. Now, that that was another way. We then concluded, what have we got to do? And to be blunt, that's when we started moving down the avenue of saying decentralisation. Get back down to, not with everything. After all, you know, I've said that although we're collectivists, we've got to recognise that you know, some collectives will be bureaucracies. It's inevitable that you get that. I mean, you can't decentralise down to the extent you can't run a bus service on an housing estate. You can't have a train service which just operates within the town. It's in fact, take it further. An up-to-date thing, problem we've got now. You can't manage climate control in a single country. Now, so these collectives, whether it's an housing estate, whether it's a town, a city, a country, the world maybe. Yes, there's it's got to be run, even though it's a collective and you want it to be in a collective, you accept that it needs to be a bureaucracy in a way. But here's the big but. If it is done where you decentralise things which, after all, only affect that council estate or that private estate, is it that local neighbourhood? Well, if people start operating collectively at that level, and I'm not now talking about a residents association or the tenants association, where in effect what they're doing then is just trying to, and reasonably trying to apply political pressure, but actually have the power and the responsibility of handling a service at that kind of level. That will, in my view, and in our view at the time, will help to promote the idea of real democracy, not pretend democracy, but real democracy. Now, I know you can argue that, oh well, there's always the danger that it promotes a kind of parochialism. That neighbourhood versus another neighbourhood, and our neighbourhood is more important than that neighbourhood. Well, I don't think that you end up with that. But what you will end up with, I think, is people recognising not only that the power and responsibility in relation to the services that affect just that neighbourhood, but they'll recognise the need for real democracy, power and responsibility at the wider level, regional, national, international level. Not, I emphasise again, back to our 95% of the population, not all of the people, but surely we can get more people involved at that local level who will come to see the structures and the benefit. And I mean this as a socialist, the benefits of having a collective system working together as opposed to working against one another, to cooperate instead of compete with one another. Now that's where we arrived at, and where we fought then to bring about the idea of, firstly, neighbourhood offices, bring it down to that level, get some of the local employees of the council, civil servants, whatever you want to call them, get them more of them actually meeting on a day-to-day basis, the people they serve on that estate, and to start judging their success or otherwise on the basis of what happens at that neighbourhood level. If we can do that, that was the thing. So neighbourhood offices was to lead the way. The second step which we were cut off totally on, and in my affair, for all the wrong reasons which perhaps can't go into it at this stage, was the decentralisation of power. Now I emphasise again, you can't run a bus service. You can't even run a big school on one neighbourhood. There's got to be another level. But if it's seen that what happens on that in that neighbourhood, as far as the public sector is concerned, is dealt with by the people, democratically dealt with by the people in that neighbourhood, and those same people then realise this wider idea of democracy and control, I think that is the way to go. Certainly for socialists, if we don't move in that direction, we really are going to have some problems. So that's it, John. That's where what we were trying to do, how we tried to do it. It's obviously been cut off, but the idea behind it, the idea of what we now term as being building from the bottom up, starting and at the level of our population, starting at that level and building up. That's the way to go. And I hope that somebody somewhere, if not me, will and not the Tribune Group and not the Warsaw Socialist Group, but others will be able to see the value in attempting to promote that policy at the council, Labour Council, Warsaw Council level. Thanks, John.